Hey, good afternoon. The Senate Government Operations Committee. It's Wednesday, April 7th. We're going to talk about two bills primarily today. Well, one is S-151, which is the bill that talks about vital records, mausoleums, and columbaria and emergency health orders. We'll go through that. We'll probably go through that. I would imagine we're going to end up voting on that as well today. And then we'll move into discussion around the Agency of Public Safety. But before we get into the bill itself, or before we go through it with Tucker, we're going to hear from David Engler, who has some comments you want to make about that bill, about this bill, David?
If I may, Senator. So
sure. And is it just you, or I heard there might be somebody with you? I was just curious.
I can tell I'm alone.
All right.
There are certainly people that are more expert in these matters, but you are stuck with me today, I'm afraid. So
likewise. Good
afternoon. My name is David Engler. I'm the Senior Policy and Legal Advisor to the Commissioner of Health. I'm delighted to be here to speak briefly about H-151. This is an assemblage of requests made by the Department of Health to the legislature on a few technical matters, some of which are in response to legislative changes that were made previously, and then the modernization of burial practices, and then something related to COVID. And I'll just walk through those things briefly, and Tucker will much more ably go through the bill section by section. In the case of birth and death certificates, 2 years ago, the Vermont went from being what was called an open record state, which is that any person from anywhere in the world could get a certified copy of a birth or death certificate, to a closed record state, where any person can get an informational birth certificate, but in order to get a certified birth certificate or death certificate, you had to be one of a listed eligible person. And the unintended consequence of that was that the Department of Health and the legislature is unaware that other state agencies sometimes need those documents for the purposes of DCF needs them, DEVA needs them in order to provide assistance to families in order to recoup certain costs. And so the purpose of the proposed language is to rectify the situation, and also specifically to allow a grandparent to get a grandchild's record. So it was a little bit more narrow. We went from this being wide open to being a little too narrow, and so this is just the correction of unintended consequences. Would you like me to move on or keep?
Sure.
So.
Oh wait, Senator Clarkson.
David, I'm glad to see it's bow tie day in Senate Government Operations.
I wish I'd known we were wearing pink. That's my fault.
Well, it was Easter, it's like Easter Wednesday, I guess. There are eggs your color, that color too. I guess my question is, when you say a little too narrow, I vaguely remember when we narrowed, when we did the narrowing, are we going to provide, well, I guess we'll go through it and discuss the language about how we're going to open it up a bit. So understanding that, okay, forget it.
And it was terribly open. It was really super open before.
Yes, right. It was. Yeah.
And this isn't opening it a great deal. It's really a very narrowly tailored solution to a
but you're enabling other agencies and state government to access
it for bona fide reasons. And to be clear, there's a record of all those things. People can't be interested in getting a certified copy. They have to have a bona fide reason. They still have to present the bona fide reason, and that the existence of that request is recorded and kept by the Department of Health.
And our just to remind ourselves of our work 2 years ago, this was in response to identity theft and all sorts of right. Increasingly difficult challenges we face with open records.
Exactly.
Right. Okay, David.
As Tucker will discuss, I think there's some conforming changes as a result of the new law coming into place. The real meat of it, and we should spend a lot of time on. It's too bad we only have 22 minutes, but this is the mausoleums and columbaria. So these are structures that are erected in cemeteries in Vermont, and today they are subject to the approval by the Commissioner of Health, and not merely to cemetery committees and municipalities. And so we're seeking to get out of that business. This was important at a time when burial practices were not as protective of public health in terms of transmissible diseases, and there might have been concern about how they were constructed and sealed, and that's no longer the case. And local boards and other municipal entities, do a more than adequate job of overseeing this work.
So remind us, David, who on a local level does oversee it? The cemetery commissions?
Typically cemetery commissions, and municipality.
And what?
And the municipality. So depending on the municipality regulations, it might be the select board. It might be, there might be a zoning issue. But typically not. Typically, it's the cemetery commission,
Right.
if there is one.
And if you're going to build one, you have to find a person who knows how to do it, right?
Right.
And then, of course, you need people to fill it.
Right.
Eventually, yes.
Well, I'm going to just leave that for now.
Happily, we hope you leave it for many.
So the last piece has to do with health inspections and health orders. So every municipality in the state has a town health officer. Some town health officers are shared by multiple municipalities. Sometimes they're professionals, sometimes they are the local fire chief, sometimes it's a volunteer. And they act as the eyes and ears of the municipality in terms of looking for potential public health hazards in that town. There are sometimes disputes, as you could easily imagine, with regard to the powers of the town health officer. And so this is at the bottom of page 5. It makes it clear that when a health officer conducts inspections, that can include records, taking samples, taking photographs, and other evidence. With regard to the last piece for the departments in the department's interest, it has to do with the service of process of health orders. So right now, if there's a public health hazard, whether it be somebody is burning, burning something they shouldn't be on their land and it's affecting the public, or whether it's a restaurant that's serving meals that include pathogens, it's incumbent upon the Department of Health to find a sheriff and have that sheriff serve the health order on the person or parties to stop the activity that's causing the public health hazard. That takes time and it takes money. So we're seeking the ability to serve that either by a department employee or by a town health officer.
Allison, Senator Clarkson.
Thanks. David, do we know how many of those are served a year in Vermont? And because that will have obviously impact on sheriff's budgets.
Oh, it's a great question. Very few.
I would have thought so.
So I don't have the number off the top of my head. I can tell you the department itself files, in my experience, I think, fewer than 3 a year. So it won't have a budgetary impact. Because we're charged with actually seeking voluntary compliance. So we go to Dave's Burgers and we ask me to stop serving serving the burgers that I'm serving because people are getting sick. And then usually even just saying, if you don't cease operation, Mr. Englander, we're going to have to serve you with a public health order. That typically is efficacious.
Might that also relate to like somebody who's like hoarding things in their home and it gets really dirty, really messy? Is that kind of stuff?
It's generally not, because it still has to present a public health hazard. So there has to be some impact on others. So
on other people, right?
If there were emanations, if there was smoke, if there was a chemical exposure, but if somebody were actually just if it was in the envelope of their home, it likely wouldn't implicate public health. But of course, there are other laws that would address that that concern.
And it says that the emergency order would be served by a health officer or someone else in accordance with the procedure set forth in Rule 4. I mean, so that we're talking about a town health officer or someone else that the town appoints to do that, take on that task. Yeah. And I presume that League of Cities and Towns is okay with this, I presume.
They are.
No, it doesn't change much.
No.
Okay, is that it?
For my part, I believe so.
Okay. Tucker, do we want to go through it a little bit? Do you feel, I mean, we just covered a bunch of it, but it'd be nice to have you just take us through it one more time so we understand what we're voting on.
Can I just,
Sure.
Senator? So while Tucker's walking us through that, David, do you think you could be thinking about any thoughts you might have on the other issue we heard yesterday about naturopaths being able to sign death certificates? I feel like while we have you here, it's good to know if the Department of Health is forming an opinion on that issue.
Sure, I could do that now, or I could do that.
Yeah, why don't we do that now? I'm glad you brought that up, Senator Rahm. I forgot about that.
Actually,
expected to yesterday.
Mr. Chair,
Yes?
our regular chair, Senator White, said that she wanted to take that up along with 289, H289.
I would wait till Jeanette's with us.
All right.
Okay.
Good to see you again, David, anyway.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, actually, and the chair emailed that to me as well, so I apologize. That's right.
Okay. I missed that.
Remind me what 289 is.
The OPR bill.
Oh, okay,
Where we're addressing that issue is in OPR.
right, okay. Tucker, you're on.
Well, thank you, everyone. Glad to be on. So David did an excellent job of giving the background. I know that we have done one thorough walkthrough of this bill during the initial introduction. So what I'll do is go through the sections, refresh your recollection, and point out some of the important details in each section so that you know what the bill is doing functionally.
Sounds good.
Section 1, as was perfectly described, these are amendments to the vital records law relating to access to official birth and death certificates. The amendments are going to allow 2 new entities to access those official copies. The first new entity would be public agencies, as that term is defined in the Public Records Act, and with the approval of the state registrar. So whenever these agencies need those records, they're going to have to get that approval.
So tell us who the state registrar is.
The state registrar is charged under the vital records laws with being the officer in control of the state registry, which the SRS, state registry system, which is where all of these official vital records are kept within the Department of Health.
Okay,
And
Thank
I thought we heard from the state registrar. Who is the state registrar?
That's a great question for David.
So the state registrar is a woman named Jean DeSille. And she's an employee of the Department of Health who sits within within Vital Records Office within health surveillance.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Go for it, Tucker.
Sorry, we interrupted your second entity.
The second entity is grandchildren. Grandchildren will now be allowed to get access to the system, and this particular entity was brought to House GovOps by, I believe, the state archivist, who was aware that there's an entire generation of people who are trying to access birth and death certificates for their grandparents in order to get dual citizenship overseas. So this was added in to make sure that grandchildren could have access to their grandparents' vital records.
And I hate to ask this, but when we discuss this, I just like to put a marker down. It's like, well, why not all descendants? Why not all direct descendants? Because we're just thinking currently, but you might be in 50 years needing a great grandchild or a great great grandchild.
We'll cross that bridge later.
Right.
David, were you gonna say something, David?
If I may, we're talking about a certified, a great grandchild or a great great grandchild could still get an informational copy.
So if they're doing research or whatnot, they can take it down. Yeah,
It doesn't inhibit research.
okay. Move along, Tucker.
Moving along, sections 2, 3, and 4 all repeal mandates for town clerks to destroy records in their possession when there is an amended or changed birth certificate. So to bring you all back, under current law, as soon as the state system pings the town clerk to let them know that there's been an amendment or a correction or a change to one of these official certificates, current law requires the town clerk to seek and destroy the records physical records in their possession. And there was testimony from the Clerks Association that this put them in an uncomfortable position of destroying official records. And the powers that be in the House decided it was appropriate to remove this, since it would not impact notification to the town clerks and would relieve them of an uncomfortable burden.
So wait, this is removing their need to do that. Okay.
Correct. Eliminating the duty to destroy those records.
Okay.
Which, makes sense, because if it's a vital record, even if it's changed, there may be actually vital information on it.
Right, especially if you're doing research, if you're going back in time, you want to see what these other things said.
Yes. And just because somebody changes their name or changes their gender or that a piece of history is there in solving everything from crimes to, history, any kind of important research, you would want to not have those records destroyed.
Okay.
I don't know how we made that decision anyway.
These amendments were all bundled together with some of the eliminations of prior law that required these certificates to be marked specifically as amended or corrected. So this was kind of in line with that idea that whatever the official record should be, that should be the official record, and previous versions of it should no longer be accessible to protect the individual's right to privacy with respect to those changes.
Right. And I understand that for current life and important, but for history, if there may be a reason to know more.
Sure. Okay.
Moving along to the mausoleums and columbaria. These sections, for the most part, shift the duty of oversight and inspection and approval from the State Board of Health to the legislative body of the municipality and the local Board of Health within the municipality. That is the gist of what is happening here. There's some new language that requires that the construction of these structures be done by an expert who has experience in this area. Starting on page 5, the last few sections of the bill dealing with emergency health orders. As was described, the bulk of these changes deal with the service of process for a health order. It would allow the issuing entity to deliver this through in-person service by a health officer rather than having it served by a sheriff or other duly authorized sworn officer permitted under VRCP Rule 4. The end of the bill, there are 2 repeals. The first repeal harkens back to the mausoleums and columbaria. The second repeal is a little more detailed, which you should be aware of. That eliminates the requirement that the emergency service districts that are determined and designated by the Department of Health under current law must be recorded in the Secretary of State's office. And there was testimony that this duplicate archiving and recording of these districts is not necessary and that this statute was outdated, so it is repealed here.
So
And
it would just be recording the parameters of that emergency services district.
Correct.
Not necessarily
And-
what they do, just where they are.
Right. That is correct. And the last time that we walked through this, I did send you the map of the, I
Right,
think,
I remember that.
13 emergency districts.
The questions for Tucker? I have a question actually, which we've already got the answer to, but I already forgot. David Englander, are you still there, David? Why are we moving the overseeing of the mausoleums from the Health Board of Health to the local communities again? You mentioned why. I'm just curious. I forget
So
why.
to be clear, they're already being overseen by those local entities. It's just
Okay.
that they also have to get approval by the commissioner. And the reason is that the modern burial practices are such that the commissioner of health and infectious disease doctors don't need to examine the ability of a mausoleum or columbarium, excuse me, to seal out, potentially communicable diseases.
Right. So all right. Any other questions or comments? Are we going to be ready to vote this out?
I don't know. The more we think about it, the more questions I have. I mean, may I just ask a question of David?
You may.
Thank you. So, just for people who do family research, I mean, or who may need if you're great. I mean, I guess it's a challenge to get, remind us, I guess, what is the difference between an informational birth certificate and a proper one?
So an informational birth certificate has all of the information that is on the regular birth certificate. A certified birth certificate would allow somebody to, for instance, get death benefits.
Ah, right.
So it's really, so the information, there's no difference in the information supplied. It's simply the ability to take that document and get something of benefit to the person, which is why there's such a significant issue with potential fraud.
Right, exactly. No, I remember this, our conversation from 2 years ago. The death certificate, there are similar issues with identity theft and stuff are concerning. But and if you had a disputed will, or that might go back a generation or two that might involve a trust, that I presume that lawyers, or if there was something needed, there would be an ability for the judicial system to access what they need. Absolutely.
All of this would be subject to a court, or a court could always order the issuance and the examination of a relevant document.
Great.
Actually, that brings up another question I had. Early in the bill, you talked about the state agencies being able to request the official records. You said they had to have a bona fide reason. Is there any clue as to what we mean by bona fide reason? I mean, I can imagine what bona fide means, but just wondering what you're thinking is.
An example would be a DCF case in which there was a question about guardianship.
Okay.
And they would want the ability to go to the court with a certified birth certificate.
Right. Anything else? Senator White, do you have any questions?
No, thank you. Thanks. I'm sorry.
That's
Thank
okay.
you, David.
So are we ready to vote for this bill, vote on this bill? I didn't mean to say vote for the bill. It's up to you whether you vote for it or not. Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will move that we vote out H-151 favorably with no amendments.
We don't need a second, right?
No.
Okay. Gail, are you queued up to be of help as I call the roll? I think we'll know the vote pretty quickly, but Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
Yes.
Senator Polina.
Yes.
Myself, Senator Ram, yes. Senator White.
Yes.
Okay, and that passes 500 without amendment.
Don't ask me to report it.
Does anybody want to report it?
Well, I'm happy to I'm not happy to, I need some help, but it does, given that there's a thread with S79, which I just reported out on town health officers, it certainly is, there's a tie there. So I'm happy to take this on if you want me to.
Okay.
I mean,
Sure.
unless anyone else is
I had
dying.
a feeling you had an interest in it, though.
What?
I had a feeling you had an interest in this.
I do. I do. I mean, it's all interesting to me. Every one of these subjects actually is kind of interesting.
Okay. Thank you, David. You're welcome to leave.
And,
Thank you,
and
everybody.
David, would you just be kind enough to email me your notes?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, David. So we were going to move on to the discussion about the Agency of Public Safety. I'm willing to let Jeanette take the lead on that, obviously. I wonder, Gail, are folks here?
I am admitting them right now, and I did post that document that you referred to earlier, Senator Polina. That's on our website now, and I just posted a link to it on chat.
Oh dear. Well, if it's on chat, we can't pull it up. Because I can't see people and do that.
Well, you don't have to do it on chat.
So it's on our website, right? Okay, got it.
I can forward that to anyone who needs a copy.
Well, if it's on our website, it's
Which was the document you just did?
It's the letter from Mr. Sorrell.
Oh, from Jacob Humbert?
Yes,
Yeah, okay, great. So
and that was
before we
sent on
start,
Monday.
oh, I'm sorry, Gail.
That was sent on Monday if anybody needs to check their email for it.
So before we start, I guess I need to ask a procedural question here. Is since this is an S bill, we're going to have permission from the Rules Committee to bring it out. And I think if we bring it out, that they will give us that permission. But my question is this likely to end up being a committee bill? Is everybody, or should I just ask for it to be drafted in my name so that we can get going on it and have actually, we make sure we don't lose the opportunity.
I'm not ready to be a co-sponsor, so.
Okay, then, Amran, I'm going to ask you if you will just put this in my name and send it to whoever needs to be sent to and give it a number.
We'll do that.
Okay, thanks. And then as we get farther along, we may all buy into it or not, but at least it'll be in the works.
yeah, that would be great. And it can evolve into a committee bill.
Well, no, it
It
will all.
How it is introduced is not always how it ends up, is it?
Yes, if it is introduced as S-224, that's what it will always be.
Right,
It
right,
won't be a committee bill, but it may have the support of the committee, but it will not be a committee bill. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to, I woke up in the middle of the night last night thinking about this. Oh, what a
life.
Huh?
What a life.
I know, what a dream life I had. But I have to tell you something very exciting before we start here. I had a real breakfast with a real person in a real place this
Get
morning.
out.
Isn't that exciting?
That
That's
is
very
exciting.
I had
home.
I had coffee and muffins with the sheriff on the porch of the general store.
How
Wow.
exciting.
The first time since last fall.
That's
Pretty
pretty good.
good.
That's really good.
I just
It's like normal.
I know
Feels
I
weird
felt
to be normal, right?
it felt weird to be normal, yeah. All right, so I think what I'd like to do today is focus on the language that came from, because I think one of the real outstanding issues here is around the independence and autonomy of the council. And, and so what I'd like to do is start with the language that came from Mr. Humbert and Mr. Sorrell around that. So is the best way to do this, Amron, for you to walk us through that, those changes, those suggestions? Or would you prefer having Mr. Sorrell do it?
It might be hard to view those changes outside of the context of the bill draft.
Okay.
So I'm thinking maybe we should, and it does, I believe, give some direction as to where in the bill draft those changes are. So
Okay.
we do have a draft posted.
Okay.
So I suggest committee members pull that up. And then we can view these changes one by one in the context of the draft.
Okay.
I would suggest that.
Okay, that is, since you've been working on this, that sounds reasonable to me. Does that sound reasonable to everybody else to do it that way? All right.
Yes, this is
Okay,
draft
great.
1.3, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we go back and we pull up 1.3. Great.
Okay. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
For the record, Amron Abergele, Office of Legislative Counsel. Just as a preface for looking at this draft, as you may recall, the Department of Public Safety came into this committee with a prior draft in a different format and did a walkthrough of that draft. I had taken that draft, converted it into a more standard draft format, which is what you see now.
Wait, before you go,
Yes.
continue. Gail, I'm going out of the meeting on this device and going into it on another one. So I'm waiting in the waiting room here and I'm going to leave on this one. Okay.
High tech.
I know.
Move. It's like a switch and bait. It's like whoosh.
Ah,
There it is.
Okay. So this draft is a updated version of the draft that you saw from Commissioner Sherling. It is shortened. I took out a lot of the references that are sort of technical changes, changing commissioner to secretary, department to agency throughout much of the statutes. And instead of doing an iterative, I guess, act timeline where you see what the statute would look at different stages of the transition, the draft that you're looking at now would be the statutes as of the completion of the transition as of July 1st, 2022. And then in the effective date section, you'll see that we only add in the provisions according to when their effective date should be, if that makes sense. So after completing that draft, I ran the draft both by the Department of Public Safety as well as Mr. Sorrell in his office and Jacob Humbert, and they provided feedback. There was some discussion, and what we have here right now is language that people could tentatively agree was a good place to start, I would say is a good place of framing this. So the feedback that you see here from Mr. Humbert is somewhat incorporated into the draft you're going to see now. I will point out where it's incorporated and where it has not been incorporated. So to begin, we're going to scroll down to section 2, which begins on page 2, and then scroll down to section 6002. And you'll see that this is, the comment was around 3 VSA 6003 to preserve the Criminal Justice Council independence. Chief Sorrell proposes that the text read that the agency would, and then you'll see that there's a line here. So I'm scrolling down to subsection C. I'm sorry, this is on section 6003.
I was gonna say, I'm,
I'm sorry.
I'm a little-
I've got too many screens going here.
okay, so 6003, section C on line 17.
Yes. So this change that was requested by Chair Sorrell has been incorporated into this language. And Madam Chair, would you like me to stop with each requested change for background and discussion, or would you like me to go through each of the requested changes and then?
I think unless somebody has questions about them, let's go through the changes and then have a discussion of them, because I've already found a number of places here where I would change language, but it's not substantive changes, just language.
Okay.
I have concern. I already have a concern, but I can wait until we're done.
Is
I don't
it a
think
technical question for Amarin?
not
or
a
is it-
drafting question. Yeah. So I can wait.
Okay.
All right. So the next provision, let's see, is on page 5, again under section 6003. You'll see at the top of page 6, the secretary may exercise administrative powers and functions relating to, and then there's a placeholder here. There was some, I would say, discussion between Commissioner Sherling and Chair Sorrell about what would be the appropriate language here. I didn't see an easy place to put in compromising language or language that everyone was comfortable with. So we have a placeholder here because I know this might come with more discussion about where the parameters are around what's administrative and what is not administrative. So that change has not been incorporated.
Okay.
Moving down to sections 6054 subsection C. I'm going to find that 6054. Not right.
I think it might be on page 10.
Thank you. I was trying to do a word find and it was not working.
It's on line 16 on page 10.
6054. Okay, thank you. C. Okay, and so this was with regard to subsection C on page 11. The comment from Chair Sorrell, the Criminal Justice Council wishes to retain the authority to appoint the executive director. And I did incorporate this change, as you will see in subsection C1. The Vermont Criminal Justice Council shall appoint the executive director. And then in 2, the executive director shall not be under the direction and control of the appointing authority, except to the extent permitted pursuant to subsection 6003C of this chapter. And this subdivision 2 that I just read is with regard to the next comment. The requested change was that Chair Sorrell further requests that this subsection C2 reference executive director for consistency. And again, as the administrative reference could be subject to various interpretations, cross-reference to 6003C. And so I did put in that cross-reference. And that, again, cross-references up to what I read before, where there's just a placeholder for outlining what is the difference between an administrative function and power and what is not administrative. The next comment was on section 6054B. This, I think, was really a wording I'm trying to describe the comment. I agreed that the way I had drafted it was perhaps confusing, so I did change the draft to be consistent with the request there. Okay, so moving down to comment number 4. This looks like it doesn't have a reference. This must be the transition section. Looking at section 3 on page 13. Chair Sorrell's position is that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council financial assets and liabilities, as well as its positions, equipment, supplies, and inventory, should remain the criminal justice's own. Further, the rules should remain the Criminal Justice Council rules, meaning that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council would retain its rulemaking authority. I did not incorporate those changes. There was some there was not agreement between Commissioner Sherling and Chair Sorrell about whether this was standard language or whether this was an area where the Criminal Justice Council's authority was being somehow moved or modified and giving the Secretary more authority over the Criminal Justice Council. Comment number 5, which is the general transition provision, which is down on page 15, section 6. Chair Sorrell wishes to express concerns that this transition section could undermine the council's independence. It sounded like there was specifically around the language authorizing, directing the agency secretary to take any action necessary to enable the organizational modernization and consolidation of state law enforcement divisions and resources. This was again an area where the interested stakeholders did not agree on whether this was language that was providing more authority to the Secretary of Administration and diminishing the authority of the council. So I left it as is for further discussion in committee. Moving on to comment number 6 with regard to section 2355. 2355.
Page 16.
Yep. Page 16, section 7, with regard to subsection C1, the council shall, this will not match what you see here because I did revise as requested to leave the language as it was, which says the council shall appoint, subject to the approval of the governor, the executive director. And then lastly, comment 7, also in section 2355, but subsection C2B, the previous version said with the approval of the secretary in consultation with the council. Chair Sorrell said that the Criminal Justice Council wishes to retain its current independence to employ staff and contract for services without the approval of the secretary, and requested that the language currently in statute remain. And I have done so and removed the modifications to leave the statute as it is currently written in that section. That's C2B. And those are the changes that I made in response to these. I apologize if that was not the cleanest walkthrough of those sections. There was an interim draft that the committee did not see, which these comments were in response to.
That's okay. I'm going to, if Anthony, I'm going to run down right now, and I just printed this out. I'm going to run downstairs and pick up what I just printed. So if you would just entertain if anybody has drafting questions for
Sure.
Ameren.
Sure. Does anybody have questions for Ameren? So these are all the questions that were written. I don't know if questions is the right word, but these all came off that memo that was sent to you, Ameren, the other day that we saw that was multi-page memo. you basically dealt with all of those things?
All of those items that were listed in what's posted for today.
Right.
Yes. That's what those are. I don't know if it would be helpful. It's been a while since we got the walkthrough from Commissioner Sherling of the bill. Would it be helpful if I did a refresher on what the bill as a whole does and the timeline?
Well,
Senator Rahm?
I mean, I have a question, I think, for Bill about this language, but I don't know if that's appropriate now, or if people want to do a walkthrough of the bill again first.
I think it would be appropriate now. We're talking about the language in the bill, I take it.
Yeah, and these changes.
Sure.
I mean, I guess first of all, I'm wondering, Bill, even if you're doing an independent investigation into use of force, do you see any problems with having this larger agency in your independence, with having this larger agency provide the administrative and operational support to you in conducting that independent investigation?
Can I just, before, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt before you start, because part of my question is that the case? I mean, that's what we're seeing, and that's what the language appears to say, correct, Senator Rahm?
Right. Even if it says, instead of previously, it looks like it said the agency, part of the agency's role is to conduct these investigations. I appreciate the clarification that's presented here, which is that the independent investigation would still be separate from the agency in the hands of the CJC. But I still am curious if the CJC could truly conduct an independent investigation in all contexts, if they're getting their administrative and operational support for that independent investigation from the agency.
Bill, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I'll try, but first I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because I either don't know or don't have the technology to be seeing the language of the drafts that you're seeing. So I've written some notes down, but I'm flying blind a little bit here, and would feel much more comfortable if I had a second screen that had the draft on it that I could see. So with that qualifier that I'm a little bit disarmed, I guess, in response to Senator Rahm's question, I hate to play lawyer, but it depends on what you mean by administrative support. And the
I'm
other...
trying to figure out what that means as well, which is why I'm uncomfortable with the language at this point, and essentially uncomfortable with the CJC being under a new agency. I guess my overarching question is there a way to be independent and be part of the agency?
When we say administrative support, what we're talking about, for example, is the assistance in drafting contracts, IT services, things of grant applications and grant for received grants, grant administration. That's what we construe to be administrative, where it doesn't, the agency doesn't have authority to engage in the substantive work of the council. That's where what's fundamentally important to us in terms of independence. And so what we were trying to suggest is, as long as the independence language is clearly defined and through legislative history, what you as the legislature means by the language, then we would be content that we wouldn't be under the thumb of an agency of public safety for our substantive work on investigations, on creation of policies, on, you know, body-worn cameras, access to military equipment, facial recognition software, the entrance exam, any of the issues relating to the curriculum at the training council, then or at the police academy, excuse me. We don't see that the agency, just by assisting us with administrative details, would be in a position to negatively impact our independence for the duties that were given under S-124. We see that there is a hybrid situation, but we, as interim executive director Sheets has testified, and I've testified, we've agreed that there would be some benefits to the council and the operation of the academy if certain of the administrative duties were afforded by the agency of public safety. The independence, for example, is that we want to be free to go in and testify before the legislature, just as we've done multiple times this session in both the House and Senate GovOps committees and in the appropriations committees in response to the governor's recommend. We don't want to be run the risk of getting an angry call from someone in the cabinet saying you may not do this or that. I mean, we won't be able to function independently and we would lose credibility, I think, with what the legislature's tried to do by the creation of the council if we were restricted in that way. So I trust the Bill Sheets, Cindy Taylor Patch, and others who see some advantages for, in certain respects, being under an agency umbrella, but not as long as the substantive work of the council is negatively impacted.
So, Senator Polina.
I was just going to finish that thought. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, Bill. On the other hand, when I saw administrative actions, I was thinking of making copies and stuff like that, because you could argue that designing contracts and working on grant proposals could really raise red flags, because you could, by designing a grant proposal, it shapes part of what your activities are going to be. So I'm not saying that I'm being argumentative at this point. I'm just saying that it raises those kinds of questions.
Well, good point, Senator, because I'm not thinking by saying being of assistance in writing a grant proposal that the secretary of the agency, an agency of public safety, would be in a position to say, no, you can't apply for that grant, or you can't say this as a reason supporting the reason for the grant. That I don't see as administrative. Administrative I see is typing the proposal or figuring out maybe what software we might need to enhance our computer system. But in terms of what grants to apply for and what to say in support of receipt of such a grant, if you're concerned that an agency of public safety could negatively impact that, then that would not, in my view, be an administrative service. That would be a decision-making service on the part of the Secretary of Public Safety, and I would strongly object to that. So I think you and I are on the same page here. I think on this, and I hope I'm not being, giving away too much.
Okay, I hear you.
I think that when you talked about grants, I was thinking of grant administration, the real administrative part of a grant. And the example I'm thinking of is the town of Brattleboro, for example, has a grant administrative unit, a grants manager. The library decides what grants they're going to apply for and does all the content work. The grants manager can help them write the grant, actually, to get it in the form that they needed. And then they can do the grant administration, the reporting and the keeping of all the numbers and that kind of stuff. But the library actually decides what grants they're going to apply for. The grants manager has no say in that whatsoever. So that's what I was thinking of when you said grants administration. You're really talking about a grants management position.
Yes.
Not the, yeah.
Yeah, it's just that we want to, if we get a grant and we want to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's so that we are not violating any of the rules and regulations relating to use of grant funds and such. But it wouldn't be that. So I think I'm agreeing with what you're saying is just, not the agency wouldn't be in a position to say, no, you may not do that or whatever. Is that you've got to do it in this way, as opposed to the substantive issue of whether you can do the action or not.
Right. I mean, grant administration is complicated. And if there is a grant administrator or grant manager in the agency, then you should be taking advantage of it. Because the police academy staff, I mean, it's a small staff. And so some of the sort of duties that don't affect making decisions, to be done within an agency construct would be take some of the burden off the academy staff. So can I ask a question about, does on page 5 of does the way it's defined, shall retain and exercise all powers and functions given to the council by law, including the power to develop training and training delivery methodology, administer professional standards, conduct investigations and hearings, adjudicate law enforcement officer conduct, and issue and enforce orders. Does that cover, is that specific enough to, and then just the secretary may exercise administrative powers and functions, and I would not use the word powers, but just change that language a little bit. Does that address it well enough or not?
I think when you were away from switching screens or whatever, Senator, I said that I was a little bit of a disadvantage in that I don't have the technology to be able to see the exact draft language. What you just read sounds about right to me. I would feel a lot more comfortable if I had the draft language in front of me, but I don't, either I'm not skilled enough technologically or I don't have access to what you have right now.
Can you go to our webpage without losing your?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Well, I couldn't before either.
I apologize for this. Maybe someone more technologically versed than I could tell me how to do it, but I don't have it. I don't have
Okay.
it to take a look at.
Bill,
It's-
I can't do it either. I have to have another device to do it. So may I ask,
Okay,
Madam
Yeah.
Chair?
yeah.
So to me, I mean, this is just as I'm listening to this, it's sort of like the council is in a co-working space with the agency. It shares administrative functions, which a co-working space does. We're all familiar with that model. And yet it's an independent, it has its own authority. It has it's clear on its boundaries and is clear on its own authority and will act and continue to act in those capacities. But that it will take advantage of shared costs and burdens with, as you would in a co-working space. Is that sort of a fair way to look at it? I mean, I can envision it in this capacity.
That is consistent with how I see it working. That yeah, that's a good analogy, I think.
But I mean, the council could be investigating someone in their co-working space. I feel like that
Yeah.
changes things a lot.
But okay,
I think
I-
that's the case, but
they may.
they might be. That doesn't bother me. I mean,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean they couldn't do it. I don't see that would be a problem
I
necessarily.
mean, I think we have to give some either we let the whole academy and the council be completely separate from the agency, or we allow them to get some benefit out of the fact that they can get administrative support. And if we don't put them someplace else, then we're going to have to provide them more resources for their administrative support. I mean, one of the things that I had wondered about when we looked at where to place the academy was, should it be at someplace like BTC? But that wasn't an option. But that would have put it under the auspices of an educational institution, but they still wouldn't have been completely separate, I guess. I don't see an issue with, I would change on page 6, on the top where it says the secretary will exercise administrative power and functions relating to, and then Ameren put in that placeholder. I would change that language to the secretary will provide administrative support and functions,
Period.
instead of saying administrative power, which makes it sound, so you're just providing administrative support.
Right. And that I think that would clarify that co-working aspect of it. And any power and authority the Criminal Justice Council retains, and we're not talking about power, we're talking about administrative function sharing, which I think is good. We could also put in, and we could review how this is working. I mean, although anybody can raise their hand at any point and say this isn't working for us, and we do feel too much pressure to not do something, or we could put in a review and see how it's working in 3 years.
I also would add develop policies under their ability, under the council's powers. Develop policies, make it very clear.
I think the question is, does this create a perception issue with the council that's supposed to be conducting independent investigation? Is there a perception that this is no longer independent? And that causes a lot of problems for why it matters to actually have independent investigation. I would much rather, what I feel like is happening is the language says, the council, I think we should start with the council is completely independent and only receives such and such very limited scope of services. But I think we need to really spell out the independence first, and not just sort of consider that an unspoken reality. I think that independence is the critical centerpiece of this.
Yes, turn it on its head in a way and start with it being an independent body that is housed and shares administrative functions with the agency.
In fact, in some ways, it should have authority over the agency in certain ways as it conducts investigations. It should not be, it's not administrative support, it's the ability to access the resources and the personnel support it needs to conduct an independent investigation.
I very much like affirmative statements that are clear. And I think the idea of starting with that premise of independence it makes a stronger statement than otherwise treating it as an exception, if you will.
Right, carving out something, but yeah, yes. I see that the commissioner has turned his camera on. Does that mean he's wanting to say something?
I turned it on just because, but I would observe, I like the approach of declaring independence, to use old terminology, and working from there to make it clear what the intent is. I just want to also flag that we keep talking about oversight over the Agency of Public Safety. It's really oversight over what would be the Department of Law Enforcement. The Agency of Public Safety is a much larger construct. And that is in part why we thought that bringing the operations of the Academy and administrative support to the Criminal Justice Council does make sense and does create the requisite distance from law enforcement operations, because the agency is much more than a law enforcement organization. It has a component, or would have components, of law enforcement in it, but is designed to do much more than that. I would also just offer that we often find ourselves in this rabbit hole of trying to create sort of workflows that don't take into account the need to hire and recruit the right people. And what I mean by that is all kinds of bad things can happen if you appoint a secretary or a commissioner of public safety that is the wrong person. One of the important pieces here is to try to elevate this work, all of this work, to include the operations of the Academy to a cabinet level, so that there is direct oversight by an elected governor, and that there are political, small p, ramifications to doing the wrong things, making the wrong appointments. So I just wanted to add a little context to this.
So I have a suggestion, and I don't know if this makes any sense to anybody, but instead of 60003 talking about advisory capacity and talking about and then carving out an exemption for the council, what if we put in a separate section for the council itself? So we had 6003 was declaring the independence of the council, and putting in there what is in C there, that what they have authority over, and then making it clear that the agency has administrative support, can provide administrative support, and then have the section on the other advisory boards as is in A and B. So then that's making that definitive statement. This is a different animal. This is not the same as those others, and making it very clear.
If I may make one other observation, Madam Chair, that was in my notes and I neglected to mention, and I'd say this for awareness more than anything. One of the reasons that this was put forth originally in the construct that it was unfortunately, there have been historic instances, some in the not too distant past, where personnel action within the academy has been necessary, and there have been significant challenges to a council that are not state employees, not embedded in the system, and often without the requisite personnel management skills. That is an exception right now with Chair Sorrell in the chair. But one of the reasons that we had this a little more closely bolted to the operations of the agency was to obviate those prior challenges. And we even faced those challenges recently with the processes to hire executive director. They require significant resources that don't exist within the existing construct of the academy or the council. And to that end, the Department of Public Safety provided significant administrative support to that process.
Well, I see that clearly as administrative support. If you have an HR person that can help make sure you follow all the guidelines and everything for hiring processes and stuff, I clearly see that as administrative support.
It gets a little more complicated when you have someone, a state employee who's in trouble for something, which unfortunately has happened. And then the appointing authority is an amorphous council versus an actual appointing authority, which is an individual. So I just flag that as a potential challenge. It's not a reason not to proceed in the way that you're contemplating, but it creates the possibility of issues down the road.
Doesn't the executive director hire the people, and the executive director of the academy, not of the council? The council hires the executive director, but the executive director hires the other personnel. And so they
not really. The hierarchy, the two directors of administrative services and of the instruction, those really, I mean, the executive director is key in that, but it's the, let's just say the council was very active in the interviews and the hiring, the decision to hire the new director of administrative services. And I think we had some language there that that makes sure the underscoring the independence of the council in that the Secretary of Public Safety would not be making the decision of who should be in the hierarchy of the academy. That's not what we envisioned.
Yeah, I would just offer what I was originally envisioning, and I'm not sure it was as clear in prior drafts, was a partnership between the secretary and the council, where the council retains oversight of things until or unless they need to hand something to the secretary, like a personnel action against an executive director, for example. Again, trying to do that with a council of X number of people is a bit of a nightmare. That's why we have appointing authorities in state government. So you're not doing it by committee. But again, you can do it that way. I'm just pointing out that what the original concept was in terms of the shared duties, and just offer that as an option.
Yeah, so I see, I'm trying to think here in terms of the town of Brattleboro. The town manager is the person that hires the police chief, but there's a committee that does the interviewing and all that and recommends to the town manager who to hire. But the town manager actually hires the person. And so I guess I don't see what the issue is here. So somebody help me out. I don't see what the issue is here, that the council would do the interviewing, but the executive director actually does the ultimate offering of the job and signing the contracts and all that. Am I wrong about that? Somebody has to do that.
I think you're
Yeah,
right.
I think it's where we draw the line between like the training staff, for example, the people that work for me. The council isn't typically involved in that
Right.
level of the process, but I think more to the commissioner's point of who is involved with issues that occur at the level of executive director.
Yeah. Well, I would think that if it was an issue of, and with the executive director, that the council would have to work with the secretary to figure that one out. If it's the executive directors, if it's the secretary that's being under investigation somehow, governor's going to take care of that.
Well, under this construct, Senator, the council would retain all of that authority, which again is one way to go, but just operationally, I don't want to bring you too far in the weeds. Imagine there's an allegation of misconduct against an executive director that requires swift action. You've got to call a meeting to present what's going on, take a vote, to have a body take it, personnel action. That's a challenge. At the same time, to Senator Rahm's point, we're not trying to create something where the requisite oversight that the council has relative to certification, investigations, et cetera, is in any way circumvented. So it's we were trying to strike a balance. This has gone, further in the other direction from what we had presented. And again, you can do it that way. I'm just pointing out the potential pitfalls. It's not,
Yeah.
We hope that those kinds of things don't happen. So again, we're talking about, this isn't something that's going to happen every other month. It's a rarity, and hopefully we'd never have to deal with it.
I would think that if you had an executive director that somehow went off the rails and you had to do something right away that was for cause, that what's your title, Bill?
I'm the chair of the council.
That the chair could immediately just relieve the person of their duties until you could take action. I can't imagine that if it was something that was so egregious against the executive director, that the chair wouldn't just say, you're suspended for the time being, and then take action. But
right. I agree with you. We wouldn't wait to get a quorum of the council together in the middle of the night to take that kind of action.
And you must have a personnel committee that could address it without having the whole council. But I would, anyway.
Just keep in mind, and I'm not being argumentative, I just want to point this out. The current chair has as much state government experience as any person in Vermont, and that is not always going to be the case.
Right. That is true. But there are legislators who have no experience, and we're actually making legislation. So
no, I just mean relative to an immediate decision versus someone who might defer to a council. It's a rarity. And I just offer that as one example of why we proposed what we proposed previously.
Okay, well, what did you think of my idea of putting a whole separate section in there that specifically addressed the council and its independence and its duties and the administrative support, to make it clearer and positive instead of an exemption?
If that was directed at me, I am in favor of that, Senator.
It was directed at anybody who cares to weigh in.
I like the idea.
I would really like to see it say something about none of this support shall in any way delay or circumvent or, get in the way of an independent investigation.
Well, it isn't just an investigation. I think that we need to be clear that we're not talking about just investigations here. We're talking about policies, training curriculum. We're talking about all of that. So I would hate to focus in just on investigations because that's only one role of the council. And we want to maintain the council's independence in terms of curriculum and policy development and the training delivery methodology, all of that. So I think that we make it clear that the administrative support does not interfere with the core functions of the council, which is those things that are outlined here, including investigations and hearings and adjudication of law enforcement officers.
That's fine
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah, I think it would be great to have it separate, although the language is pretty clear that the following units on page, whatever it is, page 4, it does say the following units are attached to the agency for administrative support. You know, only, I mean, it doesn't say for anything else, but I think it would be clearer if the council had its own section, because the others, I believe, Commissioner, the others will be viewed as divisions of the agency, right? Well,
That's correct. Component, some of them are components within divisions, but
right.
yes.
I think of them as being divisions, like the division of fire safety or fire service training, or the so I think in a way it would be clearer to have a separate section on the criminal justice.
Yeah, if I can back up a minute, I did not mean to take it out of 6002. I didn't mean to take it out of there at all, because that clearly says these are attached for administrative support. What I meant is to have a new section 6003 that's under advisory capacity that clearly identifies the council as an independent authority and clearly says it, and then gives these responsibilities and says that it will get administrative support without interfering with the core functions. And then have the section there that says except as otherwise provided and not with and B, A and B. So you're just removing C and putting it in its own separate thing, but you're not removing it from the list above.
I would support that. I think that's good.
I think that's a good start.
Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I agree. If you took what's now numbered as 6003 and took the exact same language from line 17 through, well, through number two, line 2 on the next page, and made that its own separate 6003, and then took what is now A and B and renumbered those to be 6004, I think you've accomplished what you want to do.
That's exactly what I would have done, and then just made the beginning statement a little stronger.
Yeah.
So you said it much better than I did. Thank you.
Not sure I did, but you're welcome.
All right, so are there other, were there other issues here where there was Emran, there were a couple other places where there were some not agreement.
Yes. Let me.
Would you bring us to those?
While she's looking for those, Gail has her hand up. I'm not sure.
Oh, Gail, I'm sorry.
Hi, Chair White. The HGO is expecting you in about 5 minutes.
Oh,
I
okay.
think Ameren is going to that same meeting as well.
I think mine's been pushed to about 3:30.
I think Tucker
okay.
is going to the one I'm going to.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So there was the section that we've discussed, the 6003 subsection C, where I had the placeholder, which we've just discussed.
Mhm.
Then there was this is transition. This is the transition section. I believe it's section 3. of the bill, which is down a ways.
Oh, I think it's on page 13. Is that it? Provisions for the transition?
Yes. Yes, and the concern was about subsections A, B, and D. That all of the criminal justice's financial assets and liabilities, as well as its positions, equipment, supplies, inventory, should remain the Justice Council's. And the rules should remain council rules, and the Justice Council would retain its rulemaking authority.
We've lost our chair, Senator Puna.
She's gone to House
Oh,
General.
I didn't know she had actually already left.
She has left.
Well, the words, I mean, I guess I would ask people to comment on why, I see why there could be disagreement there, because it certainly appears as if the council is going to be giving over everything, its appropriations and equipment, supplies, et cetera, to the Agency of Public Safety. Is that related all to them being independent or not? I mean, what would be the result of doing that? The wording that's in the bill came from who? Yeah, Imran.
That came from the Department of Public Safety.
Right.
It's the language that's used for all of the transfers of the Department of Public Safety into the agency, the E911 board,
Right.
the enforcement officers, all of those. It's the same language for all of those transfers.
So the question is whether it's appropriate to have that same language with the council as with the other entities. Commissioner Sherling, I presume you would speak in favor of that?
Thanks, Senator. The original goal here was to infuse more resources into the operations of the academy by sharing resources. Obviously, the Department of Public Safety has vast resources above and beyond the small operations of the police academy. So that was the original intent. I'm not clear from my discussions with folks to what extent the council actually has any assets. I think many
That's
of
a
the
good
assets are like facilities are BGSs. I don't know what else there is. So I'm not sure how this. I just don't fully understand how this is perceived as being problematic. At the same time, there's no significant advantage to the agency or the department to absorb assets and liabilities of someone else. So it doesn't make that much difference. But again, the goal was to try to be helpful by providing more resources.
Could you tell me? I'm sorry, Senator Clarkson?
Their chief asset seems to be Bill Sorrell.
Agreed. And the staff.
See, it says though, in B, it says all authorized positions.
Yeah.
I wonder what that means. Does Bill go to work for this agency now? All authorized positions. And B.
I believe that is just standard language around state government consolidations. So, in the position head count that you see when we present budgets, you'd see the dozen or so academy employees within the agency construct.
But this does beg the question, if we're going to keep it as an independent, and we're going to set up the section that clarifies it as an independent council, then wouldn't the only letter here that really applies is number C, which is the CJC will have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Agency of Public Safety. It keeps its rulemaking authority. It keeps its assets and liabilities, and it keeps its staff. Yes, I mean, doesn't it only share? Are you going to share HR? I mean, are everybody's paychecks going to come from the agency? Is that what this is trying to clarify? Or
Yes, I'm looking for a good, within the Agency of Public Safety of Commerce, for example, we have a couple of different constructs where there's an independent counsel that has full authority over spending and programmatic delivery, but there are employees of the Agency of Commerce that they exist. Fred Kenny, for example, when he was with Commerce, existed as a Commerce employee, but reported to the Vermont Economic Progress Council in his entirety. That's kind of what we anticipated with that kind of relationship we were trying to create relative to the executive director here is exactly what you see with VEPSI.
Got it. So full administrative umbrella of pay, benefits, but reporting and independent reporting, independent authority. That just probably needs to be clearly outlined. It would be interesting to see what the language is around the VEPSI incorporation into ACCD. I mean,
yeah, I don't think it's this nuanced. We are in the weeds here, trying to find our path.
I think it'd be interesting to see. I'm sorry, do you have your hand up?
I just wanted to, the question of what our assets are came up, and it would be our fleet vehicles, furniture, and other related training equipment.
The one thing that just, I mean, that makes sense, but the authorized positions is the nuance that is seems a little not complicated, but questionable. But I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Sherling, that it's relates to the VEPSI example was a good example. But I guess what I would do is I would just, in my own mind, leave a question mark here until we see the language that makes it clear that it's a separate entity, that the council is a separate entity. And that having seen that later on, we might decide that this is okay. We might decide that we want to revisit the conversation a little bit about turning over all the positions to the council, to the Agency of Public Safety. But for now, Amron, is there another section that we should be looking at?
And may I say, Senator,
Sure.
I'm not sure about the legal assistance piece. The new position that thus far has made it in the budget in the House, and we're hoping that Senate Appropriations goes along with it. Two new positions. One of them is a legal position, and I'm just raising a bit of a red flag about we could ask for legal assistance, but
you may not need it.
May not need
Well,
it.
you also may want your own legal advisors.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
Right.
And so
Our massive,
Depending on what you're dealing with, I mean, you may not want to have it be public safety agency's legal authority.
yes, that's what I'm suggesting.
our massive legal team of two would not balk at not having additional responsibilities.
Yeah,
Cindy, you have a comment there, Cindy. I don't know if you had your hand up.
Just agreeing
With which?
with Chair Sorrell.
So then that's another reason to leave this with a question mark until we get more clear about how the independence will be stated. But I think the legal assistance and the authorized positions are two things we might just want to revisit. Where do we go from here, Amran?
Down to section 6 on page 15. This is the section about transition generally. There was a concern about the phrase that the agency secretary may take any action necessary to enable the organizational modernization and consolidation of state law enforcement divisions and resources.
So this would give the Secretary of Public Safety the ability to basically do things, make changes that are made in the name of modernization, but have the power to do that without necessarily having to have it be approved by the council or anyone else. Is that
I
what
would
that was the
observe,
concern.
Senator, that I think if you're going to move the Criminal Justice Council and the Academy to its own section, you can probably obviate the impact of this piece by doing that.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yep. Are there other sections, Amrit? So are there particular questions, or those are the sections that we need to revisit, that where there was disagreement, I guess I'd call it, controversy, lack of agreement.
Lack of agreement.
Right, so far, we're getting there. But I wonder whether there's other comments or questions around any of these sections, or about where we are in general in terms of where we stand with the bill. No? And Amron, you'd be able to take what you have to come up with something around the independence issue?
Yes, yes.
Commissioner Sherling, are you okay with this so far?
Yes, I believe so. I just observe that I think we're largely aligned, if not entirely aligned, with where Chair Sorrell wants to go in terms of the independence. It's just threading the needle to make it all make sense, and not water it down so far that there's just no benefit to having the operations of the academy attached to the agency.
Sure. Bill Sorrell, you okay with this right now?
Yes, thanks to the committee for this today.
Any other comments? I don't know if Mark Anderson's here. Other folks who haven't spoken have any ideas or any comments?
Thank you, Senator. I think that I'm pretty comfortable with everyone's comments so far.
John, you're comfortable?
I can't find the raise hand feature, but in listening to, and maybe perhaps I should just say for the record, John Federico, Department of Motor Vehicles, and the VSEA rep to the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. I think I agree that there's a threading the needle piece of this. The important piece, which from my perspective, is just to make sure that the executive director of the academy just has to remain not beholden to two different groups. So it's my belief that the executive director of the academy has to be beholden just to the council, if that's the way you intend it. And the language just says you have to just assure yourselves that the language is such that they're not beholden to two different people. Therefore, the direct reports, I think, to the executive director would therefore be beholden to two different groups, and they'd be potentially in certain circumstances rowing in different directions. And there's a number of imaginary scenarios that we can all come up with, but that's the most important piece for me, is that the language protects the direction that the executive director has to row. And if that's to maintain the direction of the council without having to be beholden to anybody else, I think that's the important piece for me, from my perspective.
That was well said. I appreciate that. Tony Fakis.
Thanks. Tony Fakis, Director of Enforcement and Safety, Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. Yeah, John, that was a really important, I think, way to encapsulate it, and I'm fine with exactly where this seems to be headed in terms of the academy and the training criminal justice council, excuse me, and again, we're supportive of this piece of legislation to create this agency.
And you're okay with the move towards more independent statement is okay with you?
Yeah, I think it accomplishes, provided it's crafted appropriately. What's so important is the public has to really believe and trust what we're doing at the highest level. And I think it will all flow from there. Again, trust and legitimacy, as we know, is just the cornerstone of law enforcement. And if anybody, any group, entity feels disenfranchised from that, or feels that it's just change can't happen or accountability can't occur in an appropriate way, then it's doomed to fail.
Sure. I can't see everybody who's here, so I don't know if anybody else needs to speak or make a comment before we adjourn. I've asked everybody that I see. John, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to, I didn't, of course, know what all the chair wanted to cover in this particular hearing. And one of the reasons, of course, that that I came was in case there was the opportunity or the need to speak on the Department of Law Enforcement piece of the bill. But if that wasn't for today, then I will certainly hold and come back at another time.
Well, we're certainly going to come back to this. I don't know when. It's up to the chair as to when we schedule this next week or the week after, but we are committed to moving it out one way or another in time to get it crossed over to the other chamber. So I think what we would do is task Ameren with coming up with some language around the independence issue. And then we'll come together and revisit the whole bill again, and it'll give us better direction as to how we handle those other pieces that we left hanging around the movement of the personnel and the legal assistance. Those issues, we'll deal with those next time. We'll have closer to consensus on that. Senator
Anthony,
Clarkson?
our chair has returned, and I'm just curious because it's only 3:15. I mean, I assumed we were going to go to other sections of the bill also, or other sections of. I just assumed
at 3:30 we're supposed to talk with people about ARPA funds.
Oh, right.
Drew Hazelton, Gwen Zakoff, Peter Gregory.
Got it. Right.
So we have a change of topics in 3:30. So I was going to suggest that we take a little stretch between now and 3:30,
right,
if that's okay, and then
right,
come back and sort of finish. So we'll be finished with what we're talking about now. We come back from a little stretch, we'll be able to sit down and talk about the ARPA funds.
Sounds
Does that
Anthony,
work for people?
Senator Polina, you are much more humane than I am.
he is, and we're
This is true.
appreciative.
So
I think I did tell relay a message to John Federico that if we had time today, we would look at that. But I think that it took us longer with the independence language than had anticipated. So I'm going to try to put this on the schedule for next Tuesday.
okay.
And do you think, Ameren, that by Tuesday we might have a bill? I mean, have an assigned number and can go from there?
I would need to check.
Okay, but we can use your draft anyway, and you can change. Yes. You can be changing language in it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So we'll bid adieu to those of you who are here to talk about the Agency of Public Safety.
Thank you very much.
Reconvene next Tuesday if possible.
Great.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Polina, that was very nice of you to give a break.
I know what it's
So
like. to
will
not
I
have a
take
break.
us offline then and we reconvene after a break?
I believe so,
in
yes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Wouldn't that be about 3:30?
Sure. Well, yeah.
It's a
It'll
little
be
more
3.
like 12. It's like 13 minutes. It's 3:30.